is this. I particularly thank Rowan and his team who have just launched the website. So it's good to have this opportunity to thank everyone who involved working these things. As you know, the topic that I'm talking on is about how to deal with personal crisis from the Buddhist point of view. So I will be firstly looking at that. And the later half of this evening is talking a little bit about the book that has been mentioned, which is a result of a few years of editing, a lot of work by many people. So I'll talk about that later. But first of all, personal crisis, what is it? And of course we will look at whether it is a crisis or not from Buddhist point of view, and why it may differ. Whether it is crisis or not will differ what we do to it. First of all, let's look at what might be the situations that we may call a crisis. Whether it's we are the center of the crisis, or the crisis have happened to our surroundings, to circle of concerns, to our environment, to our home, to our society, or to our number of situations. I suppose crisis is quite different from problems, normal problems, where people have day-to-day problems. So the word crisis does expect it to be less than normal adversarial circumstances, but not something that happens in our normal situations. So the society does expect the crisis to be quite unusual, but not unnormal either. Because society have a particular expectation how it should run normally and go smoothly, and it would like to have certain control as how things should flow and shouldn't flow. So crisis is, my understanding, is a lack of control of a reasonable situation that we may say civilized manner, how things are going, almost going as much as you try and train and study and educate and have expertise and doing bring everybody's expertise, try to prevent them from occurring. But remember, all the expertise that we have, people who are trained in, not usually preventer of the crisis, but usually they are managers of the crisis. From medical professions to the emergency, to the police, nurses, mental health professions. You look at every single helping professions are all there not to prevent crisis. Of course they would if they could prevent crisis, but these are all how to respond to those crises. When a society is very much based on a materialistic kind of agenda, it tends to like to hold on to things that are not there and pretend that things are not changing. And because it has pretended too long that it is not changing, when it notices the change one time, then it calls a crisis. But if one is aware of the incessant change, from earth to water or fire, air, kind of cosmic level, we would like to Mother Earth, to not move and let us have our buildings sit still and not move when we walk, and we want our rivers to stay in the riverbeds and not rise too high. We want to have sufficient rain, enough to have good vegetable, but not too much to the extent of drowning them, or not raining at all to the extent of causing drought. We would like to have people trained to forecast our weather pattern and telling us what next Thursday is going to be like, and try to control by having and choosing right kind of clothes and pack them for Thursday and so on. So we are so used in trying to have no crisis. So the crisis generally is a result of clinging. It's not unnatural at all. It happens regularly, but change is an exaggerated description of change from the Buddhist point of view. And why it becomes exaggerated, a person or situations are not expected to change in such a way. We don't expect the earth to have earthquakes, but yet we have them. We call them natural disasters. We don't call it, Mother Earth had a back rub, for instance. We could have she just shook her back. It was just too many skyscrapers built on her, so she's just shaking. It's just too much. We don't call it that way. Or what terrible things people do on the earth, she just can't stand it. She tried to be tolerant, tried to understand, tried to support the people who are dancing on her back or fighting on her back, but occasionally she just shrugs her shoulders. But we call it earthquakes. And I don't know how often there is earthquakes in the animal insect kingdom of ants. When the sweepers comes, when the lawnmowers comes, I don't know how many earthquakes, how many hurricanes, and how many floodings will take place in their perspective. So it's just so crisis seems to be a kind of a loss of control of a situation that we think we are able to control. But nature is so powerful, like Earth is so powerful. 3 million people in one city should be heavy enough to push her down, not to move. But when she decides to move, 3 million people, or all the buildings are just like ants, or their nest in no time. But how often do we report the personal crisis of an ant or insect? We hardly do. But not because they don't occur, because we don't think they are crises. But wait until you talk to next visiting ants, and where he lost his mom and dad and he just managed to cling on to and just survived. If you were to talk to the ant kingdom, I'm sure there would be very few survivors. But those who survive probably wouldn't describe it quite as exaggerated as we humans do. So all the natural disasters usually affects a lot of the beings who live in the environment where there's earthquakes, where there is flood, where there's a fire, where there's cyclone. And then as a result of that, those who are not even hit by the flood or those not hit by the fire are also affected by those who are hit by the fire. The nations or neighbors who are not hit, but those whose neighbors are hit, becomes a cause of our problems. So it's good to think about that personal crisis is too much touching and affecting us as individuals, but environmentally and elementally, the changes or eruptions of floods and fires happening basically all the time. Somewhere it is always drowning somebody, or how many people we do here, they made it to the beach or made it to the shore, but others are drowning on the way. We don't hear many of the people's crises because there were nobody left to report us. So, most important Buddhist approach to deal with the crisis is universalization of these situations happening, not over-personalizing Over-personalization makes ourselves a lot more easier to be vulnerable to crisis kind of victim than we really ought to. Usually crises, therefore, are very complex, more complex than simple, more easy than difficult to resolve at hand. So therefore, people aren't able to. So it is quite like, say, if there's an earthquake and whole half of Canberra was affected by that, it definitely is. It is a city crisis. It's a national crisis. And sure, among those residents here, there will be some who lost their house. Others didn't quite lose their house, but they broke their leg, or they lost their pets, or so everybody would vary differently. There will be a national crisis, perhaps, or to the particular environment. How each individuals are affected will vary accordingly. But now, not only that, how 4 or 5 of the family members who were hit by the crisis will also have very different personal crises, depending how strong and wise or foolish or not they are. Some would personalize that, over-personalize that, exaggerate that, and because they're so attached to the house or whatever. So one who's attached to the house or to the dog or to the leg. Even there's 4 people who all have broken legs, but one who has the greatest attachment to their leg would suffer most. So that shows there is no personal crisis, really, that is uniformly affects us by nature, but how vulnerable we are, how attached we are, how rigid we were in accepting the change that were always happening, and we like to run things normally. If there is anything normal in Buddhism, is incessant trouble. But if you accept incessant trouble, there wouldn't be any disappointment when the trouble comes. Isn't it? So Buddhist approach is universalization in incessant trouble. It's just question is whether which one you want to highlight, which one you want to personalize. Say, I am the victim of crisis. Who want to say that? It's just so. Therefore, best way to deal with this, from my point of view, from a person's looking from the Buddhist teachings point of view, is how does your crisis compare with others? How often does people think like that when they have a crisis? They actually don't. They don't think anybody was hit by crisis but them. And so that becomes the crisis of the crisis. That becomes the mother of all crises. Person failed to compare with others who may have been not hit same way now, but who have been hit many times before, who have lost many more things than we have lost. And when we fail to compare with others who are less fortunate than us, then we exaggerate or think we over-personalize it. We exaggerate that, and therefore makes our plight a lot more terrible than actually it is. So, Buddhist point of view, it's very important to see that the suffering and the difficulties are universal and prevalent. Just question is how quickly we are good at managing them. And when a person isn't responding or just dealing with the problems very well, then they can make the crisis very quickly. They can make it as a crisis. What happens is I have researched a little bit, not a lot of time was there, but a little bit about what modern mental health people talk about dealing with personal crisis. And the first thing they say is, talk about the crisis. So I would say exactly opposite. So what happens is that this talking thing actually creates the crisis more than there is. This is what I use the word exaggeration. A person who talks about their personal crisis definitely thinks that they are a victim, no less than anybody else. There may be more, and therefore people need to be give them sympathy and understand and support and They feel as if nobody understands or supports or helps them, and without realizing how much they've been devastated by the whatever, whether that's a terminal illness, whether death of a loved one, whether a loss of a job, or whatever the case might be. They think they are the ones who lost a job. Nobody else ever lost a job. So they have this over-personalization is suggestive of selfishness. This grasping to the self and its ideas, it becomes one it wanted to control. So instead of talking about your personal crisis, you have to take time. What do you think that is crisis? Is it caused by none other than your clinging, your attachment? Is it your attachment that makes more crisis? If you're not attached to it, you'd be relieved. You'd be relieved that the house was, particularly if your house is not really looking good and it need a good new roof and all that. And then that there was avalanche, and then you'd be happy to go to the insurance policy next morning. You see, it's not a personal crisis; it's a personal victory. When you're not attached to the house. But when you think your house is, insured, you're not worried. So people, when it's all about attachment. It's not about crisis, really. Attachment is where our comfort zone that we try to ensure to keep it long-lasting has been not affected by the change, but our attachment to it. So instead of talking about, but maybe you can talk about it. But to whom? The first person. People haven't really talked about that to themselves, whether I'm being selfish. And usually it is. When you start talking about yourself and compare with others who are similar things, then you don't tend to think, oh God, this looks so selfish. I'm so indulgent talking about my problems, as if nobody else has similar problems at all. So then the person realizes that it is fruitless to talk about your personal problems to other people. So this doesn't mean you shouldn't talk to anybody at all, but it will block out many things that you were going to talk to other people. It will sift through some things that are maybe important. Maybe you do not know how to deal with it, even by your wisest listening. You've been listening to yourself recently quite a lot because it has liberty to talk to you. And even by your listening to it, you can say, sorry, I can't help you. We got to talk to somebody else. A little bit clearer than my head. Most people don't talk to themselves, and because they think they have been badly hit to be able to do anything by themselves. That's a terrible tragedy to deny oneself having ability to overcome that on your own. It's not Buddhist to think like that your problem could be solved by somebody. And your non-attachment, your understanding of impermanence is going to resolve the problem. But if you couldn't bring those readily, then perhaps talking to someone might let you to remember those things and then learn to distance from this clinging and grasping that you have to your house or to your leg or whatever the case might be. Because even if your legs doesn't get broken, it's pretty looking very old. It's getting older and older. It's almost like it really needs a new leg. Sometimes broken leg is a pretty good thing, really. So, if you do need to talk to other people after you have resolved some issues by talking to yourself, then this self-talking is called meditation. You should reflect. Meditation means reflect. Think again about it. Don't just be so honed in that is the only thing, or this is the only thing that happened, or what terrible thing. Just look at some few different points of view, and when you start looking at, sometimes you eat a little piece of sugar cane, but one part is not so. There's not juicy bit. But don't throw the whole sugar cane because one part. Let's try the other bit. Try the other bit. It's still got a lot of juice. Like cows. Meditation means tasting. means chewing. It means ruminating, you know. And meditation helps you to obtain new flavor over the topic what you've been thinking, and you dismiss some of the wrong views and ideas that you had prior to that reflection, and the reflection portrayed the true picture, not the false picture. Previously, there's a false, an exaggerated, incorrect picture. When you reflect on it, it clarifies. Therefore, one compares with other people and with oneself, and therefore one doesn't become so self-centered. And this, you can see the greatest cause of crisis is self-centeredness. When that has been recognized, then you begin to block out most of the things that you seem to be affected by. Now, if there are some issues that you couldn't still resolve on your own, yes, you can talk to other people, but not to vulnerable people. And some of those vulnerable people are the very people you will love, or you respect, you will do anything what they say. And a lot of them, out of their attachment to you or whatever, might give you the very least appropriate advice to you because their own selfishness, their own deludedness. So often there's not a lot of clear-headed people to go to, except one who is not selfish. And that's not difficult, not so easy to find. So you have to clear your head first before you are able to listen to somebody. So therefore, they say in the modern crisis, personal crisis, you got to talk to somebody, you know. And there will be very few. Maybe it's possible to get one out of many. That's someone who's really wise and intelligent and at the same time very critical. Often the people we talk to are not very critical. They try to massage your ego. Oh, you poor thing. Ah, yeah, I can see, you know. How could anybody take it like you have got through? And almost really will confirm that you are a victim. And if anybody, particularly the helpline people on helpline, all sometimes give you as you are a victim. They don't realize maybe that's what they've been trying to tell people, you know. Of course, not a lot of people can give you advice that are really valid. That they give you something to that they're so not managing so well. They need somebody to do this and do this, but they don't give hardly any will give. If one finds someone who gives us the more thinking that we couldn't do on our own and clarified a lot, and instead of looking and scapegoating someone or oneself as the cause of the problem, one tried to look at how one can resolve these and with the help of other person. So I wouldn't totally say don't talk about your personal crisis to other people, but sometimes it might be yourself that is the other person. Because that other person that is in you that you haven't really listened to, I'm talking about that. And even when you talk to other people, it's got to be a very refreshing outlook, that wise and useful and intelligent. If you don't get that, even your sister isn't the most important person, because she's so attached to you. She loves you so much, and she will make you to believe that you are a victim. She will make you believe that you are terribly hit by these things. How can you take on this? Sometimes our friends are the very least suitable people because of their deluded bias, you know. They're not the deluded bias would believe your neurosis, your story so much. And this brings another thing they say is you find support. I would say from where? I would say from within. Find the support from within. From Buddhist point of view, you find the support within yourself, not without somebody, outside someone. Because most of them, firstly, will take a long time to understand the full picture, whether you're going to tell the whole story or not, another thing. So if they only know a little story, but not the whole thing, the help they give is going to base on that incomplete, often inaccurate, exaggerated information you're giving. So you have to be very honest with yourself that I'm going to resolve this myself, and otherwise the person hasn't got a complete picture. And what's the point of sharing your deluded story when they themselves might find it affected or maybe stressed out by that, and therefore their reaction is just as their stress. Most people we seek help from are stressed by our sharing, and then the only thing they can help you is another stressful. Add on to the stress of their attachment, of their aversion to your crisis, and their exaggeration and their own reaction. So often, that's what the Buddha said. He said, don't look for a master outside, but find one within you. So, of course, this means all the time, not when you are studying or learning, but particularly when you're in a crisis. You don't go and see, where's my master? I've got a problem, They say that you've got to look within yourself if you had any master. That master is not a person, it's a thing you do. You've got to master the problem by changing your attitude towards the particular problem. And therefore, I say, find inner help than external help. The inner help usually is understanding that suffering is prevalent. So that's a good thing. Suffering is prevalent. And if you have that understanding, then you'll be tolerant. You've been tolerant that. Why? Because suffering is not only prevalent, but it is impermanent. So even crisis is impermanent. When the earthquakes, only for 60 seconds or so, 30 seconds, that's it. Or maybe 2 minutes. And not very long time, maybe aftershocks, but not all the time like that. Everything is impermanent. Sometimes some people find new land when after earthquake. Like in a place called New Zealand, called Napier. After the earthquake, they lost quite a few people, but they found many, many acres of new land. Beachfront. So you never know whether the crisis or gain. So if you look for and when you have these complex, difficult things to resolve, of course you look for help from outside and tell everything what you went through, and hopefully someone understand that, compensate for you all that. And you feel so threatened of your safety and well-being without telling these, as your safety is in question. It's your safety is. You're safer by not getting attached to what you think you have lost, than thinking what are you gonna gain back to compensate this. Lots of people, when they have crisis, they wanted to have something else in order to compensate their loss, so they're a little bit comforted by maybe the insurance money or something. But this is no compensation, really. So if you are still attached to it, your safety will be ever threatened by that attachment. Attachment threatens us all the time, not only when we have crisis. So reason is that attachment was never detected as an incessant problem. Then only when it peaks, then we notice there is a crisis. Actually, attachment itself is continuous. We were too obscure to know that was happening. And you might then start worrying about your loved ones, because if this happened to me, then what I'm going to do with my loved one, what I'm going to do with my grandmother and children, and you start worrying Then you justify your crisis even further than that. Then all the people that you are responsible for their safety, you become responsible. Then you wear all of their worries, even though they're not worrying as much, but we worry for them on top of our worry. See? And that is also now not only things we thought we lost, but attachment to our peoples. They don't have the house that we built or whatever, you see. So you feel totally robbed, not only of your house, but the house for the others and so forth. And then you really feel angry because those who you love aren't going to get what you have worked so hard to. And so this is where the crisis becomes magnified by the attachment. Because there is no understanding of personal karma or their karma, children's karma, and my personal karma. They almost one feel responsible for the future of somebody else, as we've been so good at being responsible ever since we were born for our well-being throughout, that we think that we could forecast that we could be just as responsible for their well-being in the future. We have this amazing unrealistic expectation that how stable everything will be, so that their future is guaranteed. So the attachment is now extended not only to our own safety, but now aversion to the lack of what appears to be lack of safety for your future and for your loved one. Therefore, magnifies or exaggerates our crisis even more. Therefore, the person who is hit by personal crisis feels find themselves in emotional turmoil. They can't think clearly. They're confused. They're upset, and they don't want to do the things normal. They keep thinking that something terrible has happened, that no one can take it, that has happened to them. And this over-personalization is all happening due to the attachment to impermanent things. And it's quite a contradictory thing, isn't it? You can't get attached to impermanent things, So therefore, means that there isn't anything that you can get attached to, because nothing is permanent. Nothing is permanent, from Mother Nature, the environment, to our own physical body, our emotional attitudes, our feelings, our physical health, our performance and job, our health particularly. You couldn't say anything nothing is permanent. Everything is impermanent. Now, if this news was told to people right from the beginning, everything is impermanent by the way, it would be good news. When we finish high school, they should give us back of the certificate. By the way, this is really good. You've done very well. But look at the back. Everything is impermanent. Remember this. Highest education is called. Highest education certificate. If you couldn't remember these regularly, you haven't graduated. Now, when one remembers that, I can tell you, when you remembers that, now I can think about particular few instances of personal crisis. Like, say, I was a refugee. Say, if you have been a refugee, people would think that's one of the biggest tragedy, biggest crisis. You lost your land, you lost your people, you lost your culture, you lost your language, your right to study or speak, and then losing total identity, and you're not welcome. You're not welcome to the next neighbor. They have police on the border. They're going to shoot you down. They're not going to give you a house to live in, thinking, poor thing. They're going to check whether you're genuine or not. They'll give you a tag to wear on the neck. They call number, no names, just a number. 286 was my number. Because too many of us, they couldn't be bothered checking what is your name. They just gave a number. It's total. So you're nobody except a number. If these things happen, to most people, they really feel devastated. There was a time I used to think like that. But I never thought that as a personal crisis, though. It was just like national crisis of people like me and my country. And then, of course, we thought we were the only people who suffered that. Then you realize, if you get to know a little bit more, the world has a huge population of refugees. Not just Tibetans. Tibetan refugees of Tibetans is not even mentioned, not even heard by some place, unless people have some connection with Tibetans, But most people think it's the Kosovo, or it's the Vietnamese, or Korea, or like that, or World War I or II, and so Iran. Most people don't even know that there was a country called Tibet, or a country called in East Timor. It's only those who neighbor knows that they are refugees, and they, and there's still in my peripheral of my mind, I still can think what must be like, or what I could have felt as a person hit by such thing. But I definitely can tell you with confidence, when I think in the Buddhist teaching in relation to impermanence of everything and unsatisfactoriness, even if you live in the country, even if you didn't lose your country, you still got a lot of unsatisfactoriness. If refugee was the only suffering in the world, that would be very good to stop. But even those country people who have the country of people who have freedom, whose country is not threatened by foreign invaders, it would be good if they were not hit by a personal crisis, because they thought being refugee was the only crisis. But when His Holiness Dalai Lama comes back from the world tours, he talks to the Tibetan people, he gives us assurance, look, we are not a refugee with the huge problems. We're just a small number of people. And those people who are dying or who are unlooked after in the other parts is just more horrendous than we are. And he says, most importantly, we have Buddhism. He says, we escaped with Buddhism. We didn't leave Buddhism behind and then became refugees. And becoming Buddhist is already a refugee. Buddhism, first action of a person becoming Buddhist is called taking refuge. Taking refuge from the tyranny of samsara's unsatisfactoriness. Not from invasion, not from flood, not from fire, not from ill health or sickness. Buddha said that the world, once you're born, you're already in the constant, incessantly boiling pit of fire. Just the question is whether you can find a small location where it's not burning. And if you can find a small location where it's not burning, it's called finding refuge. So those in Buddhist teaching, you find refuge. That this refuge is the best advice to crisis. How to find crisis, how to manage crisis. You have to find solace. You have to find peace. You have to find wisdom. And you have to find understanding in you that this is the nature of existence. This is not a unique problem to my people or my culture or my life. And then you universalize that, not over-personalize that. And then you develop a lot of compassion to those who are less fortunate and more frequently hit by more crises than we are. Then our crisis, our past crisis, becomes a catalyst for compassion, to develop compassion to those who don't have any avenues like these to cope with that situations. And I'm sure everyone could do that, make positive comparison and not make negative comparison, that there are they have this or that, and therefore they are going through a hard time. So it's non-over personalization. Why? Universalization of the suffering, and therefore the impermanence as a nature of existence. When one is not dealing with a personal crisis very well, not only the crisis has come and gone, but now new crisis has hit the person. New crisis is confronted with a lot of delusions, a lot of anger, a lot of blame and resentment towards themselves or towards other people, and therefore once one is confronted with a lot of negativities, and this negativity doesn't allow you to make good decisions, but keep pushing you towards making bad decisions. And the bad decisions are usually telling people that you are some kind of victim, that you have been subjected to this situation, that situation, by these people. I gone through this. Maybe you experience accident, maybe you experience violent encounter, whatever the case might be. But one who understands the prevalence of suffering and impermanence of things would not see any comfort by blaming somebody or by developing resentment, or by bad-mouthing somebody. And so most crises are created not by the crisis, but overreactions thereafter. Overreactions thereafter. And this is where, and how a person who thinks in terms of Buddhist, they develop compassion to those who are in this situation. We develop kindness and tolerance and understanding to the people who are going through this difficult time. And because we have thing called personal karma, they have their own karma. If people are experiencing something, it has preceding causes. And that causes is ripened. And now it's ripened, so don't worry about it. Those problems cannot be remedied by quick fix. Need a lot of wisdom. Even talking to people doesn't resolve the problem. Why I'm dissuading talking to people about personal crisis is this: if you talk to someone about your personal crisis, until you talk to your friend, it was personal crisis. But once you talk to the other person, it becomes both persons' crisis. Two people's crisis, then the third person, the fourth person, and then everybody will become basically smeared and affected by this infectious problem. So most sentient beings just don't know how to deal with it. They cannot isolate that. They have to share their delusions as if some terrible, unprecedented thing happened to them. And then they tell to other people, and then the other person also think, wow, and then they will put wings for that and fly off, and the other would put wheels on it, and then there's a lot of flying problems. Then basically everybody who thinks like that are now hit by that poison. And this is what they say. A lot of negative news reporting is very depressing. And now, if you tell your personal crisis to somebody, of course, that's only between you and the other person, But if it's kind of a headline or local newspaper, its whole community is affected by that. They're breathing, oh gosh, they're all affected by this terrible. But yet everybody thinks they have to get morning paper, afternoon paper, as if they're going to miss some great bliss. They think they're missing something. They don't realize there's a lot of negative reporting there, unnecessarily negative reporting. However factual they are, some are better not told. There's no benefit in telling. But the society thinks you got to tell somebody, as if that's going to benefit millions of people. But you don't. That's called irresponsible. That's not kindness, that's not tolerance, that's not understanding. That's just exactly smearing it even further than that. So, majority of the society today, they think that there shouldn't be any problem and they can't tolerate this. They don't realize the problem is universal and prevalent. They think that's single, almost unprecedented thing that has happened. When they look at that carefully, that has happened many places and situations. And if they were tolerant, meaning understanding of that, if they understand that, universality of that, then they wouldn't talk to others about your difficulties so much, because it only negativizes. Then personal crisis hasn't stayed as a personal crisis. It has affected other people who unnecessarily, by incomplete, inaccurate reportings. And if person feels, when the person has personal crisis in the modern context, they think that they have too much a problem that they can't handle on their own, and therefore they would say, can I do this with this crisis? Can I go and do that on the crisis? Then they start, I can't do this if I have this. I've got this problem, I can't do this. Then they start pulling from all responsible activities or duties that they used to have, and then they sort of curl up. And then they wouldn't do the very things that will kill good time and benefit the things. Then they take time and to think about it, regurgitate this neurosis, and then they become very depressed. Because they think about it one too many times. One thought is already bad enough. And what benefit there is to think many more times again and again. They usually say in those personal crisis management manuals, they say, take time off. I say exact opposite. That's the danger. You take too much time to vent your feelings, to brood your feelings, to think that what has happened is terrible, and you try to brood it and try to boil it for a slow cooker, That's what happens. They should stay on their duties, activities, and they should stay focused what they're doing. Because if you aren't focusing doing what you need to do, you obviously have got a lot of idle time in your mind, and then you will be thinking all kinds of deluded things, thinking they are righteous. Therefore, the person thinks that because they think that they can't do A, B, C, D, and then we'll say you have a personal crisis. Usually what happens is when in the West they say, oh, he's got personal crisis. Usually what the personal crisis, so people put a lot of pressure on him or her that they should resign. They resign from that community's activities, or that, and that. So the very important things they used to do, they'll make themselves resign. And then they got plenty of time, don't they? Plenty of time to brood on it even more. And then that kind of negative reaction makes themselves a cause of illness. Most personal unremedied personal crises are a cause of major illnesses. They become shocked, sad, upset, angry, and then they won't do that. They won't do that. They alienate from everybody, and then that self-alienation makes themselves become so unreachable by others and unreachable by their own wisdom mind because of the negativization. And particularly if, so this may, if you thought someone in your loved circle got a terminal illness or cancer or something, you think that's a personal crisis because your mother got cancer, or your husband got cancer or something. But they don't realize, if they don't deal with that crisis of your loved one having cancer, if you don't deal with it, you will contract cancer. You probably already have by thinking with that attitude. So most people, when the thing is their poor response to the crisis of a smaller kind becomes a greater cause of a greater crisis of themselves. And therefore, all these illnesses is rejected. They don't really realize that the body is actually a very, very, very strong. Otherwise, it could die very long ago. But the fact that it's coping as well as it has is already wonderful. The fact that some disease are diagnosed now or detected early is bad news, really. In those old days, people never knew they had cancer. So they just died, and they died when they died. But they never had the crisis of knowing 5 years before. See, information technology can help and harm. Sometimes we wish we never knew. But those things we really need to know, that birth is already a cancer. You don't have to have cancer. Birth already is a cancer. It's a cause of the death. The only cause of death is birth. So Buddhists would think like that. Well, I would. I'm not usual anyway. I'm not a normal person. Normal people have crises. When you realize that your birth is the cause of death, then what else is the cause of death? Others are mini cause of death. So when somebody is born, we should all cry. Oh, another death, and cry every day. Very good. Then maybe that'll fix. That'll stop giving birth. That's what the Buddha thought. That's what Buddha wanted. He can't handle. He thought people shouldn't get sick. He thought that's too much. And when he heard people will die, he thought that was even more too much. And old age, he couldn't believe it. He said, there must be something that will stop it. He was completely fit and young. There was no personal crisis. Everything was going for him. He was the king. And yet he had a crisis. His crisis was, nobody's doing anything about the birth, which is the cause of old age and sickness and all death. And he said, how can people just be complacent and not do anything about the cause of death? And all the rebirth and sickness, all these things, why are we born in this world? This is a mistake. Big mistake. Whoever created, he's responsible for this. And he really wanted to talk to the upper guy in the upstairs, saying, well, why did you do this? And then he realized there was no guy upstairs. There was no guy upstairs you can blame. And that was a good relief for him, because people among him were all doing that. And he thought, no, this philosophy is wrong. This idea of that something is created for you, and that, if you do, then all your cause of illness is, the creation is the cause of the problem. Your karma, your rebirth. So we got to think like that. Buddhists would think like that, really. If somebody say you got disease, I said, why you tell me that? I know that. I know that. I'm just coping. Coping well. What are you telling me? But I think these days we know that some people, when they know they got cancer, they got 5 years, they'll actually live better next 5 years than they lived the last 50 years, for instance. So in many ways, if you knew that you are vulnerable, you are subject to death, even with or without cancer. If there's a Buddhist person you want to go contact, he would say, you got no disease, but you will die soon. He wouldn't say, you are perfectly fine, go home, be happy. He would say, oh, you're perfectly healthy, but you'll die soon. Why? You say, because you're born. See? See, birth is the first crisis. Remember? We cried when we were born. Yeah, straight away. So, life was a crisis right from the very beginning. We just think it was celebration or something. It was a crisis. Poorly managed crisis. Nowadays we try to benumb the labor pain for the mother and the baby. I don't know whether the baby they can do something for the baby, don't go through the birthing pains. I don't think no baby has complained yet. And that's what they haven't got, a babies association, Otherwise there would be, the labor pain. There was terrible pain for the baby. He wished he never came. They say in the Buddhist teachings the suffering of birth for the baby is so hard that he really wished he thought he was going to die. He was not even born. He thought he was going to be killed by the birth. It's called labor pain. Well, labor pain is not just experienced by mother, but even more so by the baby. But he doesn't remember. So they say a lot of the difficulties that we have is because because of birth. So you should blame birth. That's very good. Blame birth, When you do that, then you tend to accept cancer, because cancer is caused by birth. And then anything you did thereafter that was counterproductive, maybe smoking or or whatever, So the other factors are there too, but much more. So that's why in the Buddhist teachings, when a person gets told, "Oh, you got cancer," they say, "Oh, thank you, thank you. I was meant to plan to die, but I was just a bit complacent. Thank you, And then you start making plans to die. Very good, If you plan to live, that's where the crisis comes. You have to plan to die. When you plan to die, you tend to treat everything as just one day. Then you try to prolong problems. Yes, people try to live too long, and then they can't cope with the pain, difficulties. If you plan to live not so long, which might be true, then you don't have a lot of attachment too, because for what? They say, whether tomorrow or world after, hereafter, which will come first, you know not. Often the world hereafter comes before tomorrow. So why work for the tomorrow when you may not have it? So most of the crisis comes from clinging and attachment, as if you're going to live long and you're going to have this house like this, or earth, or water, or the nature always staying stable, that your life will be supported. Your life is not supported. Your life is deteriorating. Even as we sit here, we are decaying. We are decaying, I'm told, particularly when you have turned 45. Until that, you might manage to think, no, I'm not decaying. And my visiting monk Kempo, he told me, I showed him an album that was like 15 years ago. He says, "Oh, you look very, very young." I say, "You're telling me I'm very old." That's right, yeah. That's right. 15 years ago, we were not young. We were not old, so we believed. But how about 15 years before that? And so on. So there is no guarantee that we will have this incessant opportunity to live very, very long. So whatever the personal crises are, such as major illness in family, loss of a job, or security, whatever you may call, violent accident, death of someone that you love, that you, as a result of their absence, you totally feel empty and almost like have no purpose to live, since you have no one to share to, and all those things. If you really look carefully, these are very, very selfish. Of course, major illness in the family, What is a major illness, We have managed to improve a lot of our health because of medical technology, for sure. But it has created a lot of major illnesses by the medical technology. Many illnesses has been created by this medical advancement. So many of the major illnesses came from knowledge of biology and anatomy too well. In the old days, they didn't know very well. They just read the pulse, they looked in the ears, they asked you to pull your tongue out. That's about it. They never went and looked inside your marrows and bones and DNAs, and they checked all those. They don't have this luxury to know so much. So much of our fear and crisis and attachment to the body comes from our excessive knowledge that has actually increased our vulnerability to be more emotionally much more volatile than we could have been, because we know so much. And as a result of that, the word major illness must be not used. You should say normal illness. Normal illness. You should say, "Oh, I got a normal illness." Normal illness. What's that? Cancer. It's really good. Because otherwise we almost put a stigma. The stigma is the one that makes crisis. We just single it out as that is unprecedented, this hasn't happened before, So the stigma must be removed by thinking it's major, by thinking it's terminal. Every birth is terminal. Birth, the one who's born has never failed to die. How about that? That's pretty terminal. We should call, he had a terminal son. Why we don't use that word, Real terminal illness is birth. And the real cause of birth is much more complex. So we should try to remove the stigma to make normal things as are not crisis things. So not using the major illness, you can say normal. Because when you talk about it, almost everyone has someone that kind of illness. So it's not really abnormal, not really unusual. It happens to everyone. A loss of a job, how many have lost it? Many people have changed jobs 5-6 times last 20 years. They don't call it loss. Because they afforded to, because they liked to. But both those people who really wish to have a good redundancy, but don't want to actually resign, nor they want to be fired, they're hoping there will be redundancy. But when they didn't hope redundancy, and redundancy happened there when they didn't hope, it's a crisis. It's a crisis. They were given redundancy, and it's a crisis. But to someone who hasn't got a given redundancy, when he really wants, that's a crisis too. He wish he could get a redundancy. That it didn't happen. They still want you to keep working. See, Buddhists can think like this, and then make it very light. It's only the mind. It's only the mind whether it's so rigid. If you get redundancy, you might get bigger lump sum pay, isn't it? See, greed is the thing. That's the center stage of the problem. You see? And when somebody say, look, we can't have you because we have no position, we don't have a demand, and they say, that's a really genuine thing. That's a genuine, normal thing to say. We should understand that. Oh, I can understand why the company is going down. How could possibly hire people like me when it has got no demand? No, we can understand, but we don't. We go and protest next day against the very company we worked in. Yeah. That's why the crises are created out of overreaction of attachment and greediness. We got to understand like that, because otherwise they call security. Australia, you don't need security of job. Those who have no job has security. It's called social security. So you shouldn't worry about that, isn't it? There is security. Actually, it's much more secure. They can't fire you for not having a job. If you have a job, you never know whether they'll keep you or not, If you don't have a job, you're in unemployment, they might even train you. See, it's real security. You got to think like that. Then you're much more appreciative of the social security. Otherwise, you think that is also your right. And you never appreciate anything, including the job and the social security. And which one will you decide to appreciate? So, best response to crisis is positive attitude. Positive attitude. Death of the loved ones. Why we don't talk about death of the hated ones? Why don't you feel sad that someone you hate died, I mean, that's a death too, I mean, he has a loved one too, I mean, we just decide to think he's hated. Amazing, isn't it? So it's not the death that's the crisis. It's the aversion. It's attachment that's the crisis. Isn't it? So even death is not a crisis. It's only when you're attached to. When you have served or cared for your mom or father or brother for as long as it was required and was possible, and they die, and there are some who have really spent time last few months giving all the things and help, and they don't feel it's a crisis. But those brothers and sisters who never attend bed any time and then come at the last minute and they think it's a crisis. Why? They never get to put any positive input towards the caring and helping the dying, and therefore to them it was too much too soon. But they themselves didn't get to do anything positive to make them feel it's not a crisis. Those who've been thinking, oh, why didn't you tell me? You didn't tell me she was sick. Oh, I heard those people. I heard lots of people at funerals blaming each other, saying, why didn't you tell me that she was sick? The only sister was the only sister who was working like hell to look after the mother. She at least assumed that they should know better, that mother is already 80 this plus. So if you didn't hear anything, you should at least care to call and check how she's going. You never bother to check, and then it's a crisis. So crisis is usually a really kind of a very poorly prepared overreactions to the things that happens to everyone. Now, if you don't put that as stigma, as a crisis, as a kind of a what they call death of the loved ones, I mean, who hasn't had a death of a loved one? I had a death of a loved one. One of my nephew, who I've got too many, so I don't worry. He committed suicide. Oh yes, he had good ideas about not living. He had committed suicide, and none of the other brothers and sisters could visit my poor sister, and of course, and then I went straight away, because that's what we are, and you can, my sister had very long history of difficulty with him. He had a lot of troubles, so troubled, and so when you look at that. Who didn't have a death of loved ones? Who has accepted the death of someone as a normal? Most people don't. They think it's too early, too young, too violent, too. Maybe they will accept people died if they have a banana in their mouth or something. Whichever way people die, they die the way they die. You can't say they shouldn't die the way they die. That's their karma. That's his own creation of karma. Person end his life where he do. Of course, we don't mean we don't love them. We wish he died a little bit more peacefully, but whatever, or a little bit later, or more convenient time when we are able to understand, or whatever. We would like all our way. You see, personal crisis only comes when you reject the things, and when you are willing to not accept the thing and reject that as something terrible. And then my sister was, of course, normal, blaming herself and her husband, and husband blaming himself, and you can see they both are very good at that. And then you really feel, look at this, amazing. Now they both know that there were times that they both didn't want anything to do with the son because he was making so much trouble. And when they finally discover where he was, and they try to contain him, they try to keep them under their control within the compound, do as I say in my compound type of thing. What the parent try to control. They want their son or daughter to be the way they want. I mean, they have 7 other children, and how many of them are doing exactly what the parent doing? He just has happened to be exceptionally different. And who doesn't have exceptionally different children? Every one of them are exceptionally different. It's just that not everybody killed themselves. But some do, and the suicide rate of young people in this troubled world today is quite high. So it's not your family. They have someone who understands it. They have there in the neighbors, whoever they go. When you begin to talk to somebody who had similar situation, then they start accept. They realize, it's not only me. I thought, it's all my fault. It's all my husband's fault because he was too strict on him. Then they both think that husband thinks my wife was too soft. My wife was thinking husband was too strict, and neither can do anything right that pleases either of the two. So even the softness of the mother or the strictness of the father, both were their way of being kind and whatever, but they both are ungifted to change the person's karma. They had to have a son who died like that, and once they begin to accept that and understand that there are many other parents who goes through like that, then they can at least stop blaming each other. Good thing about personal crisis management is you think that there are nobody like you who has gone through that. When you change that attitude, thinking there are many people who have gone through like that before and now and will be in the future even. It's not because they don't have enough good place to live, or not because they don't have this or that. Even people give motorbikes, cars, whatever you give, that's not going to change the karma of the son or child. That's the kind of unavoidable thing. So when people begin to come to accept the karma, what we call Buddhist karma, means there are some things just happen due to many causes and conditions. You didn't have enough causes and conditions to prevent that from happening. It's just like you have grown this mango tree over the years, and you never had actually reaped a harvest yet, but you're just waiting after 20 years and thinking one day the day you came home, there's half a dozen of them, the ripest ones, have fallen on the floor. The tragedy, you know. You wish you could at least pick one by one at your own time. Yeah, it's like that, you know. Even mangoes wouldn't wait for the owner. The gravitation of the earth is so strong, that it just pulled. You know, the tree was so strong, but not strong enough to hold another mango. You know, it's tragedy, isn't it, to have a mango, your first mango being hit on the floor and cracked. It depends, you know. To some people, breaking a milk bottle in the kitchen is a crisis. Oh, we had a crisis in the kitchen, they said. If they have broken quite a few times, they wouldn't say that anymore. It happens all the time, you know. You know, because they are first-time bottle breakers. then they think this shouldn't have happened at all. But you know, I don't know why we make bottles so fragile. Isn't it? We're so attached to the bottles. You know, all the people bottles. They're really nice bottles, but they're really breakable. When I went to New Zealand first, you know, they deliver this milk. They can bring in the milk, 6 of them on a little thing, you know. They put there, you know. They're so solid bottles. And they take them back next day. They don't want to keep it. They don't sell the bottle those days. They'll take the bottle back next week. But things are changing nowadays. Nowadays, people really value those. If you broke them, it's a disaster. Because they're so well made, you know. We like to think they're so well made. It depends. So the crisis is if you're attached to something, is not. When I went to see my sister to console her, I addressed to her after having a little difficulty with them, of course. I said, look, my sister, all this last 16 years, you had nothing but trouble with your son. And sometimes you did wish that he just disappeared. But when he disappeared, you wish you could find him. When you found him, you wish you could control him, you know. And when he's with you, you try to control him, and it didn't work. And so you got to accept that. Acceptance is a very powerful way to deal with crisis. And this acceptance is not a weakness, it's a fact. It's because if you accept, it changes you. Otherwise, you're stuck with that rejection and personal, kind of pity and blame and anger and all stays. But once you accept that, then at least you know how not to control the other children like that. or whatever, you know. At least you realize maybe I have been a bit too strict. Maybe I've been too soft. And then you begin to realize that even your children are not really yours. And it's really good to know that. Because otherwise there's amazing thing that we are above everything, we can have a say. I mean, of course it is our responsibility for their well-being, but if they are adult enough to do everything opposite, you know, to you it might be a crisis for having someone like you who is giving birth from your own body and not doing what you say, and yet you provide everything, give everything to them, but you get nothing good. It's a constant crisis for most parents who don't learn to let go things and not accept the children where they are. Once you accept them, there's an amazing sense of kind of liberation for you not to worry at the extent you used to worry, because worry didn't help you at all, but acceptance does. Because the acceptance will give you the daughter you want, as she is, and as she will change too. You will never have a same daughter anyway, impermanence. Daughter will always change. And she always will be your daughter, but she might even change in the way you like it. But only if once you start accepting the way she is, and then even giving her a bit of support. Otherwise, there's this aggression between the two. This constant disharmony between someone and yourself is a crisis, ongoing crisis, you know. It just doesn't get to be escalated to too big sometimes. But most of the time, it is. It's always behind the mind of the person who has this situation, and who doesn't have anything like that. Everybody has. You got to think like that. Then you accept, because otherwise you think it's your daughter is like that, your son is like that. Then that creates this stigma against you, that what must have done to deserve this, and you even think you must have deserved this. You don't think every single household has those difficulties, because you never thought they did exist, which is total idealization. And when actual household, you ask them, they have similar, if not more severe, difficulties. Never heard of difficulties, you will have them telling you. And you tell them, it looks like they never heard of that. But that's the whole thing. So if there's any benefit in talking about your crisis to someone who's really willing, it's good to understand, share theirs. Not treat us that, oh, poor you. As if they never had that sort of thing, Then definitely telling makes you feel even more sort of or sadder than you were able to do anything with you. And that conflict I'm talking about in an environment where you live and work is a crisis. Yeah, it is. Some people try to tolerate that with wrong views, resentment. Tolerance with wrong resentment is a lot of that. And because this person is superior or senior than you, therefore you just try to tolerate, but very desperately. And the resentment is brooding, and the tolerance is just simply to keep your position, not because you have goodwill towards them. It's quite the opposite. There's a lot of ill will towards the person. The one is simply hanging in there, but the crisis of that disharmony and conflict and disrespect is there, and so therefore people feel let down by someone they respected, or someone who's senior than them, and they don't understand you, or whatever, vice versa. That people you have helped isn't really appreciating of you, and now they are trying to sabotage you type of feeling. Then you feel very insecure in your own mind. So there's a lot of crises like that are breeding in people's mind if they do not contain them and recognize them early stages and saying, look, I can't keep thinking negative things like this. So that's why it's very important to not over-personalize. Not over-personalize your things, but try to universalize it. Find someone who can understand it, if that might be other than your presence, attitude, holding mind. It may be someone who is willing to think differently in you. That's the person you need to talk to. But if someone you talk to is wiser, more intelligent, who really can think a little bit different than you're thinking, that can give you an advice. And sometimes that is not easy to extract from outside you. And therefore, Buddhist teachings talks about reflecting. What was it? Was it like a dream? It didn't happen. It did happen, but is it still happening? Yes. So it's not there, really. The crisis is not there, except in the mind. Now, how long do you want to keep crisis? You're a crisis manager or you're a crisis sustainer? You're reinforcing the crisis mostly. So if you realize even your thoughts, your opinions are impermanent, let alone the thing you have opinion about, even the thing that you have opinion about, which is a crisis, itself is impermanent. So if you have an opinion that is changing about it, it's so much the better. But if you had the same view after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, you talk about it, the person's still holding the same view. No wonder he feels so rotten or sick or unhappy or negative. Is because he had created a crisis out of that. In kind of we call samsara. A person has actually created a samsara, vicious cycle. Not finding any remedies, not finding any kind of acceptance. Now, stay focused. Another thing is stay focused and make no hasty reactions. Stay focused meaning stay focused on something positive and not make hasty reactions because you were upset or you're confused or you got whatever. Don't give so much weight to that. That is prompted by negative thinking. Unless you want to sustain that negative thinking, there is no benefit will come out of that hasty reactions. People make even more negative reactions during crisis. They are not calm enough and more focused enough to see what is the better alternative than what they're thinking. So if they're talking to, again, exactly as another negative person, the negative person may look at it positive to you because they agree with your delusions. And then with their help, you can make an even bigger reaction, only to drown both you and them and anybody who joins in that. But little do they know that most pain and crises are self-inflicted. When they're negative, they keep scapegoating someone than themselves. Here, we are not suggesting to blame oneself at all. We say, do not blame anyone, including yourself. That's if you are managing your crisis. When you're starting to scapegoat, try to find somebody as if who was responsible, so that everybody can be sort of liberated, as they have nothing to do with it. They don't realize that nothing happens by itself. It happens due to many, many causes and conditions, and takes over a period of time. And therefore, no problem stems from itself. If the problem stems from itself, there's no need to have a problem, because it already is a problem. You see, so therefore the problem doesn't arise from a self. So you say, it's all her fault, or his fault. That's what usually crisis begins. So we have to prove that he did it. Then everybody get engaged as if they can prove that this person was totally responsible. And that is where we engage. We engage smart person who trained in law and litigation only to create the problem even further than it already is. And hardly solving, hardly healing any minds that are hurt by this. The whole process of dirty litigation causes more suffering. The crisis. You go to the courts. That's not a court where you have peace. That's a court of crisis. There's a crisis has